We are live for another episode of the Key to Games podcast here on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games, where each week we talk about a game design or game dev issue. I'm, of course, Josh Bycer, and my co-host, who's currently working on the game Samurai Pig, Joshua Reyes. How are you doing?
Doing great, Josh. Glad to be here. And let's get down to the topic. I'm excited to talk about this. This is something kind of near and dear to my heart.
Me too. And hopefully the internet issues will be somewhat low. We've been having windstorms and winter storms and all kinds of storms around here. So fingers are certainly crossed on that one. But our topic is going to be about game preservation. And this is something that it seems like every few months or even every year, like we get more and more calls for it. Now, longtime fans of Game Wisdom will certainly know what the Josh on the left side of the screen thinks about the importance of game preservation, but since this is your first time on the topic, what are your thoughts when it comes to video game preservation?
I think it's one of the most vital things that we should do. This is a medium that far surpasses like we've talked about before. It encompasses so many things. Like, we have artists, we have musicians, we have programmers, so many multifaceted things, and the things that we're creating should be preserved. And just because technology changes or something like that, I think it's just imperative that we save any game, no matter what, how terrible, how bad it was. I think everything should be saved just for historical reasons and that. So,
yep, and that's where I'm at as well. And for new people watching this live or recorded, as I've said, that I am definitely in support of emulation when it comes to video game preservation. I remember someone that tried to call me out on Twitter like a few months ago. I said that I'm fine with piracy and using emulators for this, and they went on this little rant saying, "Oh, so you support getting viruses on your computer and getting porn downloaded?" No, I just want to play these old games. Well, that's not piracy. I'm like, well, technically it is, and that's always.
I was very interested before we started this. We had a chat to talk about this. What your thoughts were on emulation, because I think that's going to be one of the only ways, due to capitalism. And once we get deeper into the talk, is that they are going to want to crush emulation. They're going to want to crush preservation for the pursuit of the ability to sell a 35-year edition of Halo, or for example, and so they will definitely, like Nintendo goes after the ROM hackers like nobody's business. They love it. And so yeah, I was interested in that because I'm 100% emulation and piracy for that purpose alone, for preservation. Because if not, I don't think it will be preserved. It's going to have to be grassroots gamers doing it, the ones who are truly passionate about it. Because a lot of the times, the game developers or the devs who worked on it, we don't have that source code anymore, or they don't work for that company anymore, or it's gone. Right, so we can't go and get it and say, hey, let's port it to this new software. So definitely emulation is a key, massive key for that. So anyway,
yeah, and it's something that, again, it's a very polarizing topic depending upon who you talk to. There are some developers out there who vehemently oppose preservation and emulation in this regard. I remember someone on Twitter was saying, "Oh, people just want part of these games because they want to play it." And I was just sitting there going, "Yeah, they do want to play these games.
Want to play it."
And there's several big reasons that every time I bring up game preservation, I always roll off my head. But before we get to that, kind of the news that brought this topic for this week, of course, is that Nintendo has announced that I believe by next March that they are going to discontinue the Wii U and the 3DS shops. So that means anything that you could download or buy off of them is going to be turned off. So all the games that people put on there exclusively for them, they're going to be gone. If you, of course, buy them now, they'll still allow you to re-download them, But in terms of having access to that for years and years, that's not going to happen. And it is, again, one of those big issues, when, especially when it comes to Nintendo. For
Nintendo
people,
for sure.
yeah, for people who saw a piece I wrote last year when my 3DS broke, and kind of like the mini ordeal it was to try and get it repaired or replaced, that Nintendo discontinued the 3DS. And,
Yeah.
like, I love the 3DS. I think it's a fantastic handheld.
Amazing. I was just thinking about that this morning when the piece came up. I was like, it's like one of the best handhelds I've ever. I think it's amazing.
Mm-hmm. And Nintendo just, like, nonchalantly got rid of it. And this again raises that issue, and what Josh was just saying a few minutes ago. Like, for a lot of developers out there, they may not have the control or the source and code information in order to make this stuff readily available. And there's a lot of issues from both a legal and technical standpoint about what makes it so hard to preserve these games. And
For example, I'll tell you, I have actually one game right now, one of my first games that is currently unplayable on the mobile store
mhm,
due to various reasons because of the source code needs to be updated to meet some Google requirements and stuff like that. So I'd have to go back and update the code to meet the requirements, and the cost ratio, the benefit ratio to
mhm,
doing that is really not worth that for me. You know what I mean? So
mhm,
sometimes, like, just because of updates and store policies or things like that, like, we're not able to continue the game. We would have to have someone else help with that. There's so many things. Or for example, let's take like Tony Hawk, like you were talking about all the intricacies that are involved. Like Tony Hawk had like the music licensing
mhm,
and all that stuff. So when it did get remade, it wasn't the original one. They didn't have all the same music. They didn't have all the same things because there's so many things involved. People don't own the rights anymore. Rights only
mhm,
last for so long. So, you know,
mhm. And the same thing happens with Grand Theft Auto whenever it gets a remastered or re-release.
yeah, yeah. I
And
mean, that's for that first soundtrack was like kind of what made the game for me a little bit.
mhm,
That was like 25% of the games I could drive around the car and jam out some tunes. And
mhm,
then you get the new one, and all most of them are gone. And you're like, it's not the same.
yeah.
But
That's how it was with Vice City with all the '80s classics in that one.
oh yeah, yeah.
It's also why I played a lot of Scarface, because they had a lot of like the same like kind of soundtrack for that one.
Exactly, exactly.
And this, I think, has always been kind of the heart of the issue when we talk about game preservation. Is that the industry moves so fast that it's very hard, I think, for them to kind of, check their cross their T's, dot their I's, or cover their bases when it comes to this kind of stuff. Because again, like when we think about like classic games, NES era, or even before that, people didn't care that about video games in 20, 30, 40 years from
No,
now. Much
no.
like the same thing with comic books, movies, shows, books. People didn't really think that originally there was going to be that big of a deal or the importance of preservation.
When I was a kid and I remember playing, like I was playing an NES game and I felt like this isn't going to last forever. I remember this. I
Mm-hmm.
was like, this is amazing. I remember hoping it would last forever, but
Mm-hmm.
I felt like it had like a lifespan, like a cassette or something. Like eventually, a cassette won't play anymore, and like eventually, the
Mm-hmm.
video games won't have that much life for it, because especially with the stigma that we had back then
Mm-hmm.
for gamers and stuff like that, and it just didn't seem like we should be planning that far ahead, because if that would have been part of the design paradigm that always make sure that this is upgradable for future things, then we wouldn't be here right now, right? But
Mm-hmm. Yep. And for a lot of these games, like as you said earlier, like, there's good, there's bad games, there's weird games. It doesn't really matter. The importance is being able to easily access them, and emulation has been for a lot of people the only way of
only
getting to
way.
them. And one of the defenses that I see people will often bring up against pirate or against emulation has to do with companies like Nintendo. that, Nintendo always lets you download their games off the Switch shop or the Wii shop or whatever shop they have available. But this has again been that issue that, and like going back to your example, your first game, that the cost of maintaining and preserving these games, it gets harder and harder with each new cycle. There was a story Sony put out a few years ago, and they were talking about keeping backwards compatibility from PlayStation 2 to 3 to 3 to 4 to 4 to 5. And like when you completely change, your hardware architecture in a newer model, your options are, well, do we just kind of force that old technology back in the old from the old system to this one, or do we cut our losses and focus on this? And again, like this is where, like for myself, as somebody who talks both from the consumer, from the enthusiast, and the developer side, I get both points, but I feel like there has to be a better example or better answer here. And hi, Chris.
Yeah. Oh, hey, Chris. Yeah, there definitely has to be. Like, there definitely has to be kind of some kind of middle ground for that.
Yeah,
the game preservation of society. Yeah, I believe there is already one that's existing right now. I know there's a lot of activists that are doing it right now for that, for game preservation.
And I would love to do more on that myself, on top of all the many other things I have to do. But
right. I was just thinking. I was like, what can I do? What part could I do to help? Make this more of an active thing for everyone to know. The good thing about game preservation, though, is that, okay, the way that games are being developed now, on the architecture that they're being built on, porting forward and going forward, and for the game to be able to play, it won't be so much of an issue. So you can take a game developed for like a PlayStation 3. I'm not a PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5. That would be fine. For a PC. It's all the same like architecture underneath, so that's not an issue. The issue is more like, of course, the IP rights and the stuff like that. And like, I feel like what Nintendo is trying to do is kind of like real famous for like the blue ocean strategy. And I think what they're doing right now is they're kind of trying to do like the Disney Vault strategy. So I'm not sure if they're taking down the stores, but I feel like they're going to come back out again, and then resell it again for more expensive. And this is limited time, and you can only buy this game. But again, there's a lot of games that are going to fall through the cracks, like some really cool, I don't know, some Kirby color game or something that they're not going to want to sell again, but it's going to be there, and it deserves to be there.
Yeah. And again, like when we talk about kind of like the focus of a lot of game preservation, it's on the games that were before the digital era. When we're talking about the NES, even going back to Atari, the Master System, and that gets very tricky. If like I have not done anything in terms of actually like coding or the hardware side of emulation, but I've saw interviews and pieces about it, and it gets very hard in terms of building the software that can not only emulate these games, but emulates them at the correct speed, that makes sure that the game can actually play as it did back then. And then
developers do really wild tricks sometimes on the systems. And so that one game is going to have some insane like coding trick that they would like, it took the developer to figure out how to do that their whole lifetime to figure it out. And now we're having someone trying to re-emulate and re-figure out how to make that work in the emulator. So sometimes some of, you'll never get a perfect emulated version of that game just due to some of those reasons. So
especially for a lot of this being kind of, being done in their garage. Like this is not a federally or even just a government funded project. This is just a bunch of people who just really want to play these games. Like the money they're getting may just be from people, throwing them a few bucks to say thank you here and there.
Right, but they're barely eating ramen noodles. Like it's all passion for that.
Yeah. And when we look at like the period of like the Wii and the Wii U in particular, when we started to see games get very crazy in terms of peripherals, even going to the DS and the 3DS. Like, when we start getting those more very unique designs, it's a lot harder to create a, one size fits all emulation that will do all that. I mean, the 3DS, like, my favorite game on that is The World Ends With You. It is a
Yeah. Yeah.
crazily controlled game. You are not playing that game comfortably with a keyboard and mouse, and there's no way in heck
No
you're going to use
way.
a gamepad to play that game.
No way. No way. And I'm trying to think. There's a couple other. Was it Skyward Sword or something?
Mm-hmm.
And I was trying to emulate that. And you're supposed to swing and do. You can't. You can't do any of the things. It doesn't work. And you can't play it with the mouse. Can't play it with the keyboard. And it doesn't work. So there's portions of the game. There's like I got stuck in a game because I couldn't do the mechanic that I needed to do with the controller, and that was it. And so
I'm having a flashback right now to the train one, the Legend of Zelda, the one that you're on a train on the 3DS,
uh-huh.
and there's these musical challenge you have to blow into the microphone on the 3DS.
Yeah.
That was a hellish experience for me.
Yeah.
I have horrible allergies, so I can't
Did you
be.
did you stream it?
No, but like I was like gasping for air. Like I was like blowing into the microphone as hard as I could. Was not picking it up. If you remember that episode of SpongeBob when they were doing like the band practice and like Plankton's like trying to blow into the harmonica and just like collapses, that was like almost me. Like just like trying to get it to go through. And like for a lot of these games, like I can just imagine a lot of the DS line just unless somebody can really like comes up with a fantastic solution to it, they're going to go away.
But then Nintendo's going to come down with a $14 million banhammer, and so it's like, who is going to want to take the incentive and actually do that? Do you know what I mean? And risk like jail time or like, because Nintendo don't mess around.
Yes,
they don't mess around at all.
And I think it's important, like for people watching new, that to clarify this point, like what we're talking about, we're not talking about cracking the latest Halo game or breaking Doom Eternal and giving it to everyone for free. What we're talking about are games that are basically end of life. Their shelf life is done. The system may not even be sold anymore, and having easy and readily accessible versions of those. And this is, I think, where when we talk about this topic, that a lot of people will misconstrue emulation for just outright piracy. And it certainly is not.
It's not. When that is literally the only way that you can possibly play the game. It's not about piracy. It's about game preservation.
Yeah. And that's something that I always say, like when people ask me about it, I think I may have gone into trouble as well on Twitter, but if somebody literally cannot give the developer money for a game, like the game's not either sold in their territory, it's not sold at all, I am 100% in support of piracy. That if you literally cannot give money, like if I want to give you like $20, $30, or even just buy a game outright and you cannot or refuse to take it, if my only other option is to pirate that game, then I think that's perfectly fair at that point.
Let me tell you something about piracy, and I think most devs will agree, is that, okay, if someone's going to pirate your game, they are either going to buy your game or they're not. They're going to pirate it, and they're going to play it, and they're not going to buy your game. They were never going to buy your game in the first place, right? The second one is the one that's going to play your game because they want to try it. So they want to try your game, and then once they realize your game is awesome, they're going to buy it. So that's basically it. Piracy is kind of bad, but they weren't buying your game. Like any of the pirates that are downloading it and doing that, they're not your market. Like they're not who you're selling the game to. So piracy is more of a positive benefit for developers than anything. And I think like if your game is being pirated, at least you made it somewhere. At least.
Yep, and I know people who well, they pirated like anything they're gonna get their hands on, and
Like every single game that comes out.
yeah, they didn't care. Like one guy, I remember I was talking about like good games to play, and I was like, yeah, they're like $1 or $2 on Steam. He's like, I'll just get it from insert pirate site here, so I don't get into too much trouble. But like you just said, like people who want to hardcore pirate games, they were never going to buy your game. And I think a lot of developers need to, or some developers still have that stigma that if the game is good enough, it will, transcend borders and everyone will buy it and it will be the 100% universally loved game. That doesn't happen. And like you said with the other example, like there are a lot of people, especially in third world countries and outside the United States, who either the game doesn't get translated, or due to currency exchange rates, it's like $300-$400 for a $30 to $40 game.
Right, so they have no reasonable way, maybe no legal way, no reasonable way, no affordable way to get your game, and that's the only way. And then again, it benefits you because that game is out there, and they might start streaming your game, and they might get your game out. You know what I mean? So like piracy, it's not it benefits the developer in all ways. Like it doesn't affect, like the only ones it might affect like is giant, massive, huge companies like GTA, and they might lose a little bit of money. But even then, you don't have all the features, right? You couldn't play online because they built that into the ecosystem that if you're gonna play our game, it can't be pirated, right? Because they're online services and stuff like that. So it really doesn't affect any. It's a positive thing for the
and to Chris's comment, because I think that's a really good point that a lot of people will also bring up, is the era of re-releases, remasters, remakes. That, as we've seen with Resident Evil, for example, there is in Final Fantasy, there is a huge market for modernizing these games.
Massive, yeah.
I would argue that we can't just, again, leave it all in the lap of the developer. Because one, that would mean assuming that every developer is going to keep supporting these games until the end of time. And two, that also means having to keep spending money on these games. Again, Nintendo is the master at this. There are, how many different versions of Super Mario Bros. 1 can you buy right now off their various platforms?
And I've bought every single one that I could buy. You know what I mean? It's for sale on this platform. I bought it. Like any way I could buy it, I would buy it. And it's like my wife has the, like, from she was her kid, she has her original NES with the original Mario. We have that version too. We have every other version since, and this, we will do that. So, and yeah, they're the masters of that. And I don't think that again, like with the Nintendo, they're closing the stores. They're gonna do other ways. They're gonna do, some like re-releasing, like the Disney style vault, stuff like that. But again, we're gonna lose a lot of games. They're not gonna port that. What were you talking about? The blowing.
Blowing the cartridges, or
blowing. No, for the Zelda game.
The train one.
Right, the train. Yeah. See, so like those things we won't be able to do, right? They're not. So anyway.
Yeah. And for like these games that we're talking about, Monica, it is going to become harder and harder to play them. And I mean, there are a lot. Like, we talk about like the golden age of like the PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2 era for the RPG genre. How many of those games are actually readily available to play right now? There really aren't a lot. I can rattle off a list of some of my most like favorite or esoteric ones, like that.
I mean, how many JRPGs and RPGs released during that time? It was like amazing. Like you could play. It was amazing, and like I think there's like literally none. I actually want to see you rattle off a few that are unplayable right now.
There's of course the Fatal Frame games. Well, that's not an RPG.
Fatal Frame.
There was there's a steampunk game that I actually had the original PS2 for. It was a Steampunk Chronicles, I think, which is kind of like open world slice of life, but everyone is also steampunk, so everyone has like mechs that they can pilot and fight in. There's a game about sentient tanks, metal something. There's like very kooky game where like all of a sudden like a tank comes to life or a vehicle comes to life to fight them. Legend of Dragoon that Chris just mentioned. Breath of Fire Dragon Quarter is one of my all-time favorites. They recently just ported Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne to the PC. But of course, we got the classic Personas. Oh, well, this one. Shin Megami Tensei Digital Devil Saga. What was it? Spirit Detective Renoa Kozunoa versus the Infernal Army. It was like the longest damn title for an RPG.
That one, yeah.
And again, like part of the challenge of a lot of these games, again, going back to the IP issues, that a lot of these games, especially all the licensed games, like how many games had licensed characters or even getting celebrities to voice them, that they don't have the rights to.
They don't have the rights, right? So it's like music actors, characters, assets, like, and it depends, like just every single facet, like the writing, like you don't know what the contracts were signed, and they didn't design, they weren't creating the games to be like, they were thinking, okay, it's going to sell for like 2-3 years and that's it. Like they weren't thinking ahead of time, like for that.
And that is always like a very big point that I bring up when we have these discussions, that the games that we're talking about, they're not in hot demand. Like, these aren't games that people are, knocking over displays and breaking down doors to get for Christmas or whatever holiday that you celebrate.
Yeah, those are getting remakes already. Yeah.
Like, people, and this again has always been one of those issues. And I think I have an idea where you're going to fall on this, but I want to always bring this point up, that there's always been that kind of dichotomy between the consumable side of video games and the artistic side of video games. That for a lot of people, I feel like they view video games as just consumable. They're something you buy, you play for maybe a month, 2 months, and then you sell it, you trade it, maybe you even throw it out at some point. Who the hell cares about trash like Dark Souls or The Last of Us or Super Mario 64, right? They're old news these days.
Old news. Right. Old game is old game. Yeah. Exactly.
Oh, I'm going to get in so much trouble that gets, clipped out of context. Even more trash like Halo.
Yeah, trash like Halo.
There we go. I gotta hit all the major platforms.
Exactly.
And like, it's that tough point about the consumable nature of the game industry, that when we treat games like this, and it even goes, I think, back at the heart of where a lot of people still look at video games as a toy. That, like, when you go to like a mainstream, you see like a news piece cover video games, they're going to cover, Fortnite, Call of Duty, Madden. Maybe they'll cover a Mario game, and that's it.
Rarely. They'll cover more like the sales of the Switch or something. They'll be like, Switch has sold so much, and that'll be covered more than the game.
Yeah. I mean, I would love to know the statistic. I don't think anyone will actually know this, but how many people still don't know what Steam is? Because I'm sure there are people out there who have never used Steam before and who play video games. I mean, again, I remember, people arguing about downloading Steam. Like, even into the 2010s, there were people who were like, I don't want Steam.
I was there. I was like, what is this infrastructure? I did not want to download it. And then I downloaded it. I was like, oh, okay. But
yeah, I didn't download until like 2007, 2008 with the Orange Box. Like, for like the whole 4 or 5 years before that, I was just like, I don't want this thing. Like, have to put this on to play games, and, I can't just, put a CD in. And then I was like, wait, I don't have to ever put a CD in my computer again?
Yeah,
it was just like,
you
can hear like the angels.
I can download. Yeah, exactly. It was a whole new thing, and like it made multiplayer play it. Yeah, I think I started with the Orange Box too. Is
Yeah.
about when I got it.
Yeah, and that was like I was going to just say like that is exactly what I said back in like 2005. Like
Yeah,
this is never going to take off.
think I'm not gonna work. Who wants this? I'm going to GameStop.
Mhm.
And
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 Xbox will be the future of video games.
seeing Amanda said she just learned about Steam a couple
Yeah.
years ago herself. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and like physical copies, like that is something that again is brought up a lot when it comes to game preservation. Hi, David.
Hey, David.
That the hard copies are going to still work. Why do we need to preserve when we still have Super Nintendos and GameCubes and all that? But whenever this gets brought up, I always bring up when I spoke with the director of the Maid. It's a museum that is basically all about video games.
Oh, wow.
That they preserve video games. They have old magazines you can read. You can sign up for a daily pass and go and play the games and all that.
Where's this at? Where's this at?
I think it's in the Midwest. I don't remember exactly where.
Check this out. Tell me about it later.
And the Maid, like when I spoke with him, he said like, yeah, like we do this, but at the same time, all this hardware is still finite. There's only X number of Super Nintendos out there or PlayStations, and if something breaks, you either need to have replacement parts or a replacement system.
Right, and I mean, and TVs that can still kind of like, and then if you want like the authentic way that it played, that it looks on an SNES looks right on a CRT TV.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't look right on a LCD. So it's like if you want a full authentic version, right? You're talking about just rare parts that you can't, hard to find and really expensive and unattainable, and maybe you can afford to play like one game. Right,
Yeah.
and then,
don't forget, of course, that TVs have evolved. That a lot of TVs these days, I don't think they have the CRT hookup.
They don't. My wife was all, "Hey, let's plug the NES," and I was like, "No, we can't. We can't plug it into the TV." She's like, "Why not?"
Yeah, exactly. And to Ogor's point about hard copies being collector's items, that's another very big issue that for a lot of these games, and this has always been like one of my thoughts, that I have never been a fan of collecting video games.
No, man.
Because again, collecting them is not the same as experiencing them. And I always get like this little voice in my head like yells when I look at like YouTubers and streamers who have like walls of games, classic games that they're probably never going to play.
Never played them, and they're sealed, or like they're not. They're just there, and so the other people are not enjoying them because collecting games isn't cool in that regard. I agree with you on that, definitely.
I mean,
yeah.
Yep, go ahead.
No, sorry, go ahead.
I mean, I have tons and tons of games on my Steam library, as anyone can witness the horror of that. But I can play those games. They're not, locked up in, I mean, some of them have them like what they do like with trading cards and comic books. They like seal it up in whatever that substance is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then of course we could get into the, but yeah, that well, let me go stay with the Steam thing first. That again, that was just one of the most amazing for game preservation. Steam is gonna be helpful for that again because it's not locked behind anything. We can play anything. We don't have to go get adapters and stuff like that. And if you want to play with the controller, you can plug into a control. You can plug a controller in. You can have the peripherals that you want, and you can have the same console experience through Steam or through your PC the same way through emulation. Not perfect, but we could get there. And then I had another point, but about Oscar talking about games, just purely being collectors is definitely a bummer.
Oh, nice, Chris. Yeah, and the problem again with older hardware is that it gets harder and harder with each passing year order to do this. And how many NES games are just like not available anymore? And I know there are third-party people who have made like bootleg consoles or bootleg hardware that you can play those games on. And I mean, that is great. But again, it still raises that problem of physical space is also limited. Like, the beauty about Steam is that, guess what? I don't need to have all my back
The whole
filled with.
wall, right?
I mean,
You
again, I
know,
have 3,000 games on Steam. How the heck would I fit that physically in a house?
3,000. You couldn't. And then if like you were still
Mm-hmm.
like using like some were computer games with the old crystal cases
Mm-hmm.
and the big giant box, you couldn't. That would you would have to have like an extra room, and then
Mm-hmm.
you wouldn't ever play them probably either because you'd have to go in there and parse the room
Mm-hmm.
physically.
And make sure all your hardware is maintained and
And the
have the right
hardware is maintained.
TV.
I don't know how those collectors do that. I guess it's just you really got to have skin in the game for it. But I think it's more of just wanting to have the thing than actually like fully enjoying it. I'm not sure. I'm not a collector, so I can't say. But
Yeah,
um,
and we could certainly, I think, even compare this with the whole NFT craze, but that's definitely a topic
I
for
was
another day.
yeah, I was literally about to say I think NFTs could fit in here somewhere, but let's not.
Yeah. And again, like for the games that we're talking about, there really isn't money or quote unquote money in them, at least from
No,
a developer standpoint.
no,
That
there's no money left in those. No. Mm-mm.
and I do and like again, like for somebody like me who, studies these games and writes a whole lot about them, it's important to be able to experience them. And from a kind of a game design standpoint, that if you cannot play these games, you're not really getting the big picture about what makes them work.
That's one of the yeah, I was hoping to get to that point. To me, one of the most important aspects is I want to be able to go back and play this strange, obscure game, this
Mm-hmm.
strange RPG game. And what mechanic did they use? I know they use this really cool, and I can't go back and see what it was because it's so hard to see. And even if I watched a video on it, that's fine, but it's not actually experiencing it with the full context of the game, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of games that I would like to go back to and see what's happening, see what they use, and I won't be able to do that, and fellow developers won't be able to do that. So like we'll have future game developers never seen these weird, strange,
Mm-hmm.
amazing, cool games, and we might end up with I doubt it, but we can end up with maybe more placid and normal games because those are the ones that kind of just stuck around. The crappy Halos stuck around.
And another RPG I just remember, Parasite Eve. I would love to go back and replay that one. And
That's a great one.
yeah,
Yeah.
and like you said, for a lot of these games, they are oftentimes very experimental in some aspect.
Hmm.
And the only way you're going to really be able to experience them is to is by playing them. And again, like you can learn, like if you're good enough at understanding game design, you can learn a lot about a game just by watching it. But there's only a point that only gets to a certain point there. Like as we've said before, when it comes to the UX of a game, you oh, I remember C-Man.
Right? So we can't play Seaman anymore,
Yeah.
can we?
Mm-hmm. But with trying to experience these games, you can't really get the full picture without actually putting hand to controller. And I think one of the things that causes a lot of first time indie developers trouble is again the UX or the game feel. You can watch 500 videos on platformers or 800 videos on shooters or RPGs, but unless you actually play those games, you're not
Hmm.
really getting the understanding as to why did they do this instead of that.
Hmm. Yeah, it's the same thing. Like it would be like watching someone, I don't know, throw a frisbee, and then you're like, okay, I know how to throw a frisbee now on YouTube, and you go outside and you can't throw a frisbee. It's the same thing for game design, right? Or watching a
Hmm.
recipe. You literally have to go out there and throw the frisbee yourself. You literally have to go out there and cook. You literally have to go out there and develop the game yourself. You got to feel the game yourself. Before you understand like what's going on, somebody could tell you, "Yeah, it feels great," but until you feel it or experience the mechanic in the way like maybe
Hmm.
some of the PS Vita where you would use like the touch screens and stuff
Hmm.
like that, like Tearaway, for example, like you can tell someone, but you literally have to feel it to
Mm-hmm.
know what it's like, you know. So also, like a lot of the we haven't had them in a long time, but when we would have game conferences and you would get to game dev conferences and you get to play all the really cool little experimental, they would have buttons and just weird stuff and see what they're working on, you know what I mean?
Yep.
So
Oh yes. And for a lot of these games that you're trying to study and trying to do research on, you can, like, I see developers. I think somebody may have gotten in trouble on game dev Twitter the other day talking about like game design being its own separate practice, and somebody got offended by that for some strange reason. And oh yeah, and thank you, David, bringing home, not bringing home, but bringing up Sweet Home. Sweet Home was a game that I wanted to do research on for my horror book. But the problem is that it was never translated officially from the NES. It is kind of the precursor to survival horror. In many ways, it was the game that supposedly Resident Evil was going to be the sequel to before it got
wow.
transformed.
Whoa, okay, I need to look into this then.
I've only played Sweet Home one time, and that was on when I did a whole lot of ROM acquiring, I guess I should say, and I haven't had a chance to play it since. But again,
Okay.
that's a really good example of piracy and preservation
Exactly.
being it. Like, there's no other way to get it. And this goes again back to that point that if I wanted to go to Nintendo and say, here's $20, here's $40, whatever, give me this game, they're going to say, no, we
No,
don't have it. We're not going to give it to you.
not gonna give it to you. You got to wait for the 45th anniversary edition.
Yeah. And hopefully you get lucky. Again, people have been, whenever we bring up Nintendo, Muller 3 gets brought up. As fans of Muller 3 have been demanding that game get translated over now since, the dawn of time.
Yeah, I don't know. What do you think about that? Do you think that's gonna happen?
I have no idea. I mean, they brought Muller 1 and 2, but
Right. Yeah,
I don't know.
I don't know. There might be some other reasons behind the scene that we don't know about for
Hmm.
translations on Mother 3. Maybe you have to look deeper in that one, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Muller 3 is the sequel to Earthbound, because they changed the name when it was translated to the United States. And if you've never played Earthbound, that is a trip. I do want to one day try and do like a full stream of that game because
You
it's such a
should. You
fascinating
really
one.
should. You really should. Yeah, it's an amazing game to break down and study and all the kind of things that it turns on its head and yeah, it's a really great game.
And just the existential horror that it gave the kids for that final boss fight that's still being talked about.
Yes, yes, it's amazing. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
And again, it goes back to this point that there are a lot of very inventive games that they weren't 10 out of 10 winners. They weren't Game of the Year winners by any stretch. But they still deserve to be remembered and they should still be studied. Because when we talk about game design, a lot of this is about understanding the mechanics and the UX. And you can't get that, again, as we said, 100% full of just watching footage. And like you said a few minutes ago, that if you don't study these games, it's going to kind of hurt your ability to make more games in the future. Or you may just try and make something old and just completely miss the mark. Because there's been a
Mr. Mark,
lot
because
of.
you're trying to
Mhm,
reinvent the wheel of the old that was
mhm,
already done right, and you didn't study it, so you're like you do it and it's just terrible, but you could have studied the previous.
mhm,
A lot of times when I'm studying mechanics or I'm trying to think, I go back to the basics, right?
mhm,
Because the older games, like the basics are there and they lasted and they were
mhm,
solid and they're good. And a lot of the times the gameplay loop is a lot more because that's what they had to depend on, right?
mhm.
So if you really want to study mechanics and gameplay loops, you really need those older games and those older Stranger games to really study. Yeah, definitely. Because it's a lot harder to say, go play Assassin's Creed and give me the what mechanics are cool or stands out about it, and you might be
Mm-hmm.
parkour. Like you're
Mm-hmm.
not gonna be able to like. You can study those games, but you need to study the smaller game compositions first before you can go to like something that big, right?
Yeah. And for a lot of developers who have tried to emulate classic games, they will oftentimes miss the mark when it comes to the feel of these games, even just to the difficulty. And there's a far cry between somebody making a game like Shovel Knight or Curse Castilia or Super Hydora and just, saying, here's my quick and dirty version of Mario, or my quick and dirty version of R-Type, or pick any game like that. Because if you don't have that background, you're kind of just, throwing things against the wall and just thinking,
Right.
or you may get the wrong lessons as to why did somebody play a game like R-Type? Well, it's for the brutal difficulty. Not exactly. There's more to it than that.
Way more. Yeah, you're not. No. I mean, nobody's playing. Like, it's the main reason I'm not playing. I'm not playing Dark Souls because it's so hard and I die all the time. It's a part of it, right? But there's a lot more to it than that, right? Good combat, really interesting lore, a lot of like interesting puzzle designs and bosses and stuff like that. R-Type kind of was the same way too, right? It was like really hard shooter, but it had really cool, unique characters. The graphics were like, I mean, chef's kiss for like for that era. So, and it was kind of like not the first of its kind, but it was really unique in its way in a very saturated market, I think, at that time already. So,
And I want to go to a point that David just said a few minutes ago, because I think this is something that we were also talking about on chat last time we were discussing topics, about how piracy and preservation has been kind of the groundwork, or the only work, done in order to keep these games going. And that has to do with MMOs and live service games, because this is another huge gap when it comes to the game industry. And for a lot of people out there, you may have missed, again, the MMO boom of the 2000s, like 2004 to maybe 2009, 2010.
Yeah.
There were a lot of games released, and guess what? A lot of them failed. And the problem when it comes to MMOs and live service style games is that they oftentimes don't have, a local version. It's all done server side. So when those servers get turned off, that game is dead. It is 100% dead. Even if you have, the original CDs, you literally cannot play these games anymore.
Can't play them. Yeah. And of course, there is like for larger ones, they make private servers, right, that you can play. But again, it's not the full experience. Like because they don't have like the way they have to like reverse engineer unless they can get their hands on the source code for example, for like Final Fantasy 11. That game still exists, but they have private servers already for it, right? And the way that they can figure out is they have to like actually monitor the data of the real game, the live game, capture that data, and then they like figure out what's going on, and then they make that work in their game. So it's this huge, massive ordeal, like to get like a couple quests going or this and that. So you usually still have like a ton of stuff missing, right? Even from like an MMO emulator. So again, like we were talking about, okay, well, we had physical aspects of like due to hardware, where we're going to have actual like parts of MMOs that won't function at all, and we have no way to like figure out how they're working, and it's up to, again, these volunteers that are working on it. But yeah, MMOs is I mean, I'm looking at MMORPG games list, and this has a list of canceled MMOs, and I cannot parse this. The list is unbelievable. 2007, 2011. I mean, Age of Armor's Online, Age of Morning. I'm still in the A's.
Oh yeah, you'll be there for a while.
It's amazing.
Yeah. I still love the Earth and Beyond. That was Westwood Studios at MMO, and sadly the game that caused the studio to go under.
Mm-hmm.
There
Mm-hmm.
was Auto Assault. Like that's been the game that I really want to play, but I was playing Sea of Heroes at that time, so I didn't
City of
want to.
Heroes. City of
Yep,
Heroes. Yeah.
they went out. I don't know if Anarchy Online is still available.
I thought that was closing too. But maybe they kept it open. Maybe they kept it open. Not sure.
Hmm.
Sure.
But yeah, there's a ton of MMOs out there that you are not going to be able to play them anymore. And there was a lawsuit, I think someone tried to file against one of the preservation societies a few years ago because they wanted to use cracked servers and piracy like that to be able to play these games or emulate them. And developers were saying, no, you can't do that. But again, there's no other way to play these games. And that again gets at the heart of this topic that when we're talking about these games, there's just no legal alternative.
Right. And then also for MMOs, like I think there's a little moral dilemma here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because like the people they're either paying a monthly sub usually, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or somehow, right, they're investing something, but they're investing their time. And I
Mm-hmm.
mean, these are MMOs, right? You don't just play for an hour or two. You're putting in hundreds and hundreds of hours into your character development and your progression, and then all of a sudden they just delete it, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so not only is that bad for that game, but are you going to want to play another MMO again? Are you going to want to invest another 200 hours into an MMO you're not sure is gonna make it? So there's that side of it too, right?
Yeah. And mobile is, I think, a really good comparison. There are who knows how many live service and mobile games these days that they're gone.
They're
Like
gone.
you
Yeah,
can't play them.
you cannot play them. I mean, like you couldn't even play. Oh my gosh, I can't think of it, but it was it? I don't know. I forget. But there's so many mobile games you can't play just because Google and Apple they upgrade their requirements for the APIs
Mm-hmm.
and different things. So again, you have to maintain your code base, and it's just not always worth it. And then sometimes, I mean, sometimes again, like if I needed to update something, I might need to like speak to because I only contracted the music out for so long. I have to contract the music guy again and pay for it again and maybe pay for something else again. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not cost effective, right?
Yeah.
So
And I know people will say, well, who cares about these games? But again, the point about preservation is that it's supposed to allow for anyone. If somebody, has it in their heart that they want to play Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde or Jaws or BMX Triple X or, the trash games we mentioned earlier, like
Fester's
Horizon Zero
Quest.
Dawn and stuff like that, they should be able to play these games.
Yeah,
And
and for any reason, just to see why it's a bad game, right?
mm-hmm,
Why it's a bad game, why it's a good game, all the reasons. They just need to be able to see every single game. Imagine if we did the same thing with movies. Well, nobody watches Gone with the Wind. Let's throw that
mm-hmm,
movie in the trash. People would freak out, right?
mm-hmm,
Well, it's the same thing, and we should be freaking out right now too, like
yeah,
because there's so many things that we're missing out on, so many games that are dead. Like literally, they are dead. We will never see them again. Like
mm-hmm,
the developers are not there. The copyright things are not there. The people who bought the IP from the dev studio, so the devs don't own it anymore, and then the company that bought it, they don't care. So
mm-hmm.
you know,
Yep.
yeah.
The game that a lot of people bring up on that very topic is was it No One Lives Forever, the
Hmm.
very famous kind of '60s spy themed FPS. That when the studio got sold, the rights went to like 10 different places, and it's almost impossible to get that game. And of course, Piracy, you know, they can do it within probably like a weekend of getting that
Hmm.
game cracked and uploaded for people to play.
Hmm.
But again, that is another example of a game where the legal version doesn't work. Like it's just not going to be possible unless somebody really throws tons and tons and tons of money at it. And to Chris's comment about wanting to see more like Twisted Metal likes, it again, I just wonder how many developers played that series Because
Hmm.
one of the things that we've seen from the independent side is that, they play a game that they really love that they're not finding another version of, so they're going to try and make their own. Again, Stardew Valley is the quintessential example. I know somebody is making a spiritual successor to Toomba, one of my favorite PlayStation
Oh
1
wow.
platformers.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I know. I actually have a buddy who's working on kind of like a spiritual successor to Twisted Metal.
Hmm.
Carnage something. I don't want to give it. But Alan Callan, yeah, he's working on a Twisted. It's looking really good. And
Hmm.
he actually had some developers that worked on the original one. They saw his work on Twitter and
Hmm.
reached out to him and said, "Hey, man, we're glad we haven't seen anyone try this in a while." And they gave him some pointers and tips, and they were pumped like that they actually saw someone
Hmm.
working on another Twisted Metal because I was a huge fan, and then you didn't see it for like 20, 30 years, not 30, but 20 for a while,
Hmm.
for a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, the Apple 2 RPG scene surprisingly has a lot of developers. I know, I think it was Scold is being developed. There's another one, was it Nox Arcanus? I spoke to the two developers, so hopefully they're not watching, so I forget
Man,
their names.
I know, right? Man, hey, I learned how to program on an Apple TV. I love that thing. That's cool.
Hmm.
That's really neat. I didn't know about that. You should check him out.
Yeah. And again, like, they're trying to make these games in that old style. And if they didn't have access to those games or, that love of it, they weren't going to make it.
Oh, never.
And this is again why it's very important to preserve these titles because everyone wants to preserve, Mario. Everyone talks about Mario and Halo and Uncharted and games like that. But the point about game preservation is being able to access a lot of these games that did something differently that wasn't going to be a 10 out of 10 winner. Like we said earlier, with the age of RPGs, the PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2 era, there were a
Amazing.
lot of experimental RPGs that people could learn from if they had a chance to play it.
We could have some because I don't know if you've personally to me, I haven't really seen anything that inventive in RPGs in a while. I see
Hmm.
some really, really great art, some really,
Hmm.
really everything looks real pretty. People throwing a lot of money at the games, and I
Hmm.
could tell that. But I don't see a lot of the creativity or originality that was there. And I think that maybe a lot of those developers missed out on that. And again, because there's literally no way they could play them, right? And
Hmm.
and I mean, you're gonna have to source out this $150 rare RPG from somewhere. You're gonna have
Hmm.
to source out a working PS1 console, a TV or an
Yep.
adapter that works. And so we're talking like what, $400 or $500 to play maybe one game, or you could get it emulated. I don't know how the emulation scene for all of the RPGs is. Hopefully, it's good.
Yeah, I still need to get like emulation for like the arcade games and emulation for like 3DO and hell, I would like to get emulation for like all the old platforms.
Yeah, 3DO, like all the AM2
Hmm.
stuff. Yeah, that would be really neat. Yeah, a big fan of the AM2 stuff back in the day, the arcade stuff.
Yeah, and this is why like we talk about game preservation in this fashion because you're not going to in most cases like most consumers are never going to be able to play these games, and that list gets wider and wider every passing year because there's only so many PlayStations and so many Nintendos out there. Yep, exactly. Yeah, Lord, I really do want to play them. I may have to buckle down and go to one of those sites and see what ROMs are available. Again, not naming
Punisher,
what those sites
Pu-
are.
Punisher and Cadillac.
Cadillacs and Dinosaurs is a arcade beat 'em
Oh,
up.
okay. I think I might have. Was it around like the Turtles and Simpsons time? Ninja
Yeah, like
Turtles.
94, 95.
Yeah. Oh man, that was a good time. Good time in the arcade then.
And like the Marvel stuff is a really good example. There were a ton of Marvel beat 'em
Oh my
ups and
god. Oh my
fighters and
gosh.
action games, and I'm sure Marvel slash Disney is not exactly going to be letting people emulate those or do a remaster of them.
No, no, I don't think so. I mean, maybe the Simpsons game, didn't that one just get a remake, I think, but then it was terrible. I'm not sure. I might be wrong.
Yeah. I know,
I've
like
got Go ahead, sir.
I was going to say, and like Another thing, like specifically, I know people bring about the arcade market is I know One Up, like that company has been doing a lot of kind of classic masters, but
Hmm.
again, it still runs into that problem. They're still like I think like $400 to $700 a pop, and it's still a machine. Like again, in this room, as you can see, I don't have a fifth wall that you can see that is like
No.
80
Yeah.
miles long. That I can fit with arcade machines.
I actually, a few years ago, I bought two. I bought like a Tekken one, and then
Mm-hmm.
I bought an NBA Jam.
Oh,
I bought the
nice.
Yeah, I bought NBA Jam and a Tekken Tag 2, but I didn't. I ended up like I left them at one of my buddy's automotive shops. And I couldn't keep them
Yeah.
anywhere, and so they were really neat, and we had fun, but you know,
Mm-hmm.
that's a different. I don't know where you can keep them. I mean, I guess you got to have a mansion basement or
Yeah.
something.
And like, don't forget all the light gun games: House of the Dead, Silent
Oh,
Scope.
yes. Hey, man,
Oh,
even that Jurassic Park one was
yeah.
would is cool, right? Do you remember the
Mm-hmm.
Jurassic Park? Yeah.
Yeah, Star Wars arcade was
Star Wars.
amazing.
Even that Aerosmith one. That
Oh
one
yeah, Revolution X. Yep, I remember that one. And again, your options are very limited. And part of that, again, is just unfortunately by the very design of this industry. That is it. Again, it is capitalism as a
capitalism.
racketeer, a capitalism hoe. That
Mhm.
people want to earn money, and if they see that there's any interest, they're yes, point blank. Another, I have the, I think I saw the original PlayStation One when they brought it over. I may have
Oh,
my old light guns
wow.
around here somewhere as well. I should try and
You gotta
find them.
find those, man. That'd be neat.
And oh, and speaking about another nightmare, Rock Band, the whole music genre that blew up from like 2000, what, like 6 to like 2012 or something.
Oh, yeah.
Like
Yeah.
the legal copyright nightmare of trying to bring those games back. The Beatles Rock Band, that should be easy to get those rights back, right?
Super easy, right? The easiest one.
Just call up the Beatles estate; they'll give it to you. If you call them up at the right time, they'll just give it to you for free.
Free, no problem. Oh, for your Rock Band game? Yeah, sure.
Mm-hmm. And this is again why these issues really come up. That people will always try to get money from whatever rights and licenses they have. When I saw with Farsight, who did the Pinball Arcade, which I don't know if that's still being developed right now, but during their heyday, they told me so many horror stories about getting all the licensings for like the Star Trek table or the Addams Family. Because you not only have to get the rights of the machine, you get the rights to every actor and actress that appeared on it,
Yeah.
all their voice lines, all the music. And if just one person says, no, I don't
I'm
want to give
done.
it,
Hmm.
the whole project is scrapped.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a nightmare. I've always tried to I've always been scared to dip into any IP stuff like that just for that reason.
Hmm.
Um, because I already had one of my games affected by it by preservation issues, so I'm gonna try and make sure
Hmm.
that every game forward it doesn't. But again, I'm not the main issue here. Again, we're talking about all the obscure stuff,
Hmm.
right? So you know,
Oh, there's a challenge. I could never play Dance Dance Revolution. I do not have the legs for that
oh,
at all.
John, I thought we were gonna have a DDR face off.
There. Oh yeah, I should do that when I get to 10,000 subs. Right?
Yeah,
Just get the old pad out and just break dance
yeah,
on
man.
this. I found footage of someone like playing that game when I did my I did a presentation about the arcade industry. Like they're playing like the game like the most highest speed possible. I was like,
Wow,
how do the
man.
legs move that fast?
Yeah. Oh, we're getting stream hiccups again.
uh,
Chris says.
eh. I can hear like the wind blowing outside my house, and I just see like OBS. Like every time I hear the wind blow, I see OBS like lose like a few thousand kilobits of speed there.
Well, you know what? Well, no, I don't think it has to do with the time because it's 5:47. Well, we started at 4
A little after
last time.
4:30.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
and again, like when it comes to the arcade side, these games you weren't going to get a work again. Like these games, a lot of them were never ported to consoles because again, back then the arcade was superior to the console
Superior.
side.
I would salivate at the idea of playing like an arcade style game at home. I remember like, oh, if I
Mm-hmm.
could just play it like as good. Yeah, but they were better, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I didn't even think about that. The whole arcade industry, like so many brilliant games that weren't ported over, and because there's no way to port them because like each one was designed like on
Mm-hmm.
their own kind of board chip and their own chipset, right? So they're
Mm-hmm.
all kind of different. I mean, I had a different, like I had those two cabinets. Each one was a completely different board, completely different things. There was nothing, but they were very similar, like in years and stuff, but everything was different. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's a harsh reality there.
Yeah. And you cannot emulate some of these games without those specific hardware and those specific peripherals. At least
Mhm.
not getting the full picture of it. And again,
Right.
like
And
we're going to have to, I think, swallow that bitter pill for a lot of these games. Even if they do get emulated or cracked, you're not going to get one to one the exact same experience.
right, you're going to get a watered down something, but I think that's better than nothing, though. Hopefully, I mean, maybe if you could use your light gun and you get your oh, what was that good virtual cop? You get virtual
Oh
cop.
yeah.
Yeah, but that did come to consoles, didn't it? It went
Mm-hmm.
to yeah, it did come to consoles. But anyway, you get my drift. If you could emulate something like that, and it's not full, I think it's definitely at least something positive there.
Mm-hmm. Chris, if you do enough DDR, does that just give you like super running speed? Then you could
It
just like,
does. It does.
and jumping as well. You get like some super powerful legs there.
That was part of their training, right? Some
Mm-hmm.
DDR.
There you go. And like going back to Nintendo, as we said, like Nintendo will or they'll always try to keep bringing these versions back. But again, I remember buying when the original Wii came out. I bought a lot of classic games on there because I thought, well, it'll be around forever, right?
For
Well,
same thing, same thing.
no. When they went to the Wii U, those games weren't cross compatible.
You had to
And not
buy them.
only that, but they even bring all the games that they brought from the Wii to the Wii U shop. And then the same thing from the Wii U shop to the Switch.
Switch shop. Yep. Hmm.
And again, it's just like Nintendo's issue is that they're just going for very much the short term slash and burn strategy, where I think the industry really needs a long term one.
Right. And like but Nintendo's like they're infamous for that. Like they did the for example, like around the GameCube era, I think that's when they did the blue ocean theory, right? They knew they
Mm-hmm.
couldn't compete hardware wise, right? They couldn't make another
Mm-hmm.
PS2 or an Xbox. So they decided to just, okay, we got to make something different, make our own market, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think Nintendo's always concerned about just keeping themselves separate because they can't compete with Sony. They can't compete, but they can
Mm-hmm.
compete. They can do their own thing, and then keeping themselves separate is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
That's their main goal. So they're really good at creating scarcity in their products. I think
Mm-hmm.
they did that for the Wii. That
Mm-hmm.
they made it hard to get one. So by making it hard to get one, everybody wanted one. I don't know if you remember. I mean, I've heard so many stories
Oh
about people
yes.
waiting in line for their Wii's.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, just nightmares to get it. And I think it was even 3 years. I think it took 3 years for it to be like readily available for people to get. And so they did that strategy. And I think they're doing the same thing now
Mm-hmm.
with the same thing for the stores. They're creating an uproar, making everybody think, oh no, I'm never going to be able to play this game again, and hopefully get some people hyped up because you can still buy it. So maybe they're trying to get a couple people to buy everything right now because maybe they think it won't. So I think there's a lot of factors that they're playing in, but either way, everything they're doing is wrong and is too much capitalist based. They need to be they're Nintendo, and they need to be a lot cooler about everything. They need to stop hacking people about the ROMs. They
Mm-hmm.
need to be more liberal about their amazing artwork creation. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I remember. I'm pretty sure I was working at GameStop at that time during the Wii. That like one of the managers, like she like gave a Wii to like one of her family members. She told me, "Well, don't tell anyone about this." Like that was like during like peak Wii craze, and with like Nintendo, as Alberto said, that they'll just keep bringing them back to resell. I remember like they just did something like I think last year, the year before that, with the Super Mario collection. They had
Right.
64. What was it? 64 Sunshine and
64
Galaxy.
Sunshine and Galaxy. Yes. Yeah. And it was Galaxy 1 and 2, right? In it
Maybe.
also. Yeah. And I was like, I think we got it. I
Hmm.
think I wanted to get it because I mean, why not, right? Like I said, you got
Yeah.
to buy every copy of Mario.
Mhm.
It's
And they did with a Kirby as well a few years ago for the GameCube. I think that they had the
right.
Kirby Superstar collection.
Yes,
And
the
to Algodo's
Superstar.
comment, yeah, but a lot of people tend to forget that Nintendo was the bad guy for a very, very long time. I mean, they were the king of the game industry from what, like 1985 to, regard maybe like 96, 97, maybe even beyond that.
Beyond that for a little bit, yeah, definitely. I mean, they have
Hmm.
definitely just been lording over it the whole time. And I
Hmm.
mean, like the little guys like PlayStation and Xbox and Sega, and then they were fighting to try and scrap it out. But Nintendo has always really had some very oppressive uh ways and rules about they did. Do you remember like if you wanted to make a game for the NES, you had to license like you had to get a license for the cartridges or something
Yep.
like yeah, they were wild like so they've always been very very hardcore about everything that they would uh get produced or put in their system, and I think they want full control over everything in that
Yep.
regard. Yeah.
I read Game Over, that book that was like the historical like history of Nintendo. Like,
Oh, I've been dying to read that one. I haven't had a chance.
yeah, like they did a lot of shady stuff. That like, if the internet was around back then, you would just be seeing people flame Nintendo.
They would have been canceled, man.
Yeah, probably. And to Chris's point about staying outside, I was out at midnight at Funkoland 99.99 for my Sega Dreamcast.
Right on, man.
Mm-hmm.
Dreamcast, cool.
And there has to be a better solution for this. And in terms of our time, we're about an hour and 10, so I figure we'll go for another 15, 20 minutes if that works for you.
That sounds good.
But I want to talk about what are the possible options, because I think that's always the toughest point.
That's the
Because
hard part. Yeah, I was ruminating. I was like, what? Thinking and thinking and
mhm,
thinking. So go ahead.
because the problem, again, is that we want developers to get money. We want them to have the money and get paid for the work that they do. But at some point, a game is just not going to be sellable. Again, as we said, for a lot of people who treat video games as a consumable, most people do not care about Madden, 2005. They don't care about the original Metal Gear Solid. They don't care about any game that made top 10 lists, 10, 15 years ago. So there always comes a point where these games, they're done. Like, it doesn't matter how great they are, it doesn't matter if it was the number one game, it has reached, end of life. And I think part of the challenge is the industry has to come to an agreement as to what does end of life for a game look like.
Yeah, so I think we need to reach first of all, I think we need to develop some kind of standardization
Mm-hmm.
about video games period, right? I don't know if that exists in the movie industry. Like I don't know if you create a movie and it has to be stored somewhere, right? Like there's a presidential movie library or there's a presidential video game, but I think that we need to start enforcing that like somehow some way. I don't know about
Mm-hmm.
enforcing it, but like we need to make sure that every game that we have is preserved.
Yeah.
And just period, like in I know we've already lost some already, but going forward we need to, and we need to. What is end of life mean? So when a game reaches end of life, what does that mean for the licensing of everything,
Mm-hmm.
right? If a game has reached an end of licensing, does that mean the end of life? Does that mean, okay, well, null and void what the game was? If it had this song in it back then, it's reached its end of life, it doesn't matter anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's just like public domain or something like that, right? Because nobody could make money in it anymore because nobody owns it, right? So maybe
Mm-hmm.
it could one option is it could just be public domain in some fashion, right? That's one option, of course. And then, but yeah, we definitely need to reach some consensus on how we handle what is the end of the life of game, and I guess that means is there's just no more sales, no one's buying it, no one's playing it. All the copyrights are expired, right? So it's dead.
Mm-hmm.
I can't get it out and somehow start selling it again. And so from then, we should have a standardization of how we handle it from then, and I think that'll help
Mm-hmm.
definitely in the long run. That's one idea. What do you got?
Yeah, like I think coming up with a agreed upon rule for how long a game can be kind of kept within its copyright. Like for me, I feel like either 10 years after a game has
10
been
years.
released,
10 years. 10
or
years is what I was thinking.
if the console or if the platform or the store is no longer accessible. I think that should be like immediate grounds for
I,
public domain. Like if you
correct.
literally cannot buy this game anymore, the store or the platform is not in production anymore, that should be a huge red flag. And again, like I know the defense people will bring up, again, going back to the remasters and the remakes, that if you want to remaster a game, you can do it. But again, you're going to have to do more than just say, here's the exact same game, we didn't touch it at all, give us $39.99 for it. Like if you want to remaster, add new modes or touch the game up, you can certainly do that. But the original version, again, if I can't go to a store and buy that original version for a retail or fair price, then it should be made available for everyone. It's the same thing
Exactly.
with books. Like again, I don't have to spend hundreds of dollars to get a rare edition of The Lord of the Rings, or I don't read a lot of books these days, so I'm like grasping for at straws there. But again, there are public libraries. Like, why aren't there an option for video games?
Exactly. Exactly. It would be cool if Colonel Jeffrey version becomes public domain. Yeah,
Yeah.
that would be cool too. Oscar said, like, if the company remasters it, that's also another way. If they remaster the deprecated version becomes public, that's true. But again, what we were saying is that yeah, remakes are cool and everything. They're flawed though, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's not the original thing. It's not the original game. Original developers aren't there. It's made by a different team.
Mm-hmm.
They're trying to interpret the game. They don't have all the assets. They're not working with the same thing. So ports are just, that's not even like something that we should be considering. We're talking about the original versions of the game as the original developer intended it, within consideration of the hardware and stuff like that. So yeah, I wouldn't even put ports into that. But yeah, the public domain thing I think is definitely the best thing. If you cannot purchase it on the store anymore because the platform's gone, for example, EA Origin or something, and it's the only way you could buy it, and that went down. Now the game's public domain, and that's just how it should be. And concerning MMOs, I want to get back to MMOs for a second. I know we could talk about MMOs for a long
Mm-hmm.
time, but I think the same thing for an MMO. If you're making an MMO, if you're making an MMO and your MMO fails, you should release your source code. You
Mm-hmm.
release the code so people can make their own private servers of the game. Because
Mm-hmm.
if you've gone bankrupt, you're not doing anything with the game, you don't own in it. I think that you should have to, again, passing whatever we agreed upon, the time where it becomes public domain,
Mm-hmm.
that they release it so people can play those MMOs, because it's so sad that people are putting in so much time. People devote so much time in MMOs. They attribute themselves with the characters, and they put in hundreds and
Mm-hmm.
hundreds and hundreds of hours, and then they're not able to play anymore. So I think MMOs definitely should also have maybe a little more extra in that regard,
Yeah.
right? That they should be able to allow a player to set up a server and make a private server without legal ramifications after, of course, a certain time.
Yeah.
So
And yeah, that's always that challenge. There wouldn't, like, to David's comment there, like there would have to be, something put into law about this. Like there
yeah,
has to
yeah.
be something set that says that once a game has hit that point. There's definitely a greater talk here about just digital rights in general that we
Yeah,
certainly don't
exactly.
have the space tonight, but that could be a topic to come back to in a future one. That again, a lot of developers, especially those who work with IPs, they didn't think about these games 5, 10, 15, 20, 30
No, no,
years.
no, man, they were just super pumped. They were like, "We
Mm-hmm.
got this IP. Let's make the game." And that's it. They were like, "We finally got this. I got the Batman IP. Let's make the Batman game." And they
Mm-hmm.
weren't thinking further than that, right? So continue. Sorry.
Yeah. And it's going to take again a change in the copyright laws and preservation in order for this to really work.
Yeah,
And
this has to be law based. This has to be. It's still a bit while we're still the game company's still in our infancy, right? So
mhm.
we need to have some laws. Of course, none of the laws we have right now going are up to date with technology in any way, and so
Oh
that's
yes.
that's also another can of worms. But like we'd have to have rules in place about the game IPs, just like we have them for books, and just like we have
Mm-hmm.
them for right, like a book, characters in books. After so long, I think you can make a game about Sherlock Holmes right now, like
A
that one.
specific kind of Sherlock Holmes. I think they said like you can't like it has to be the emotionally
Emo.
closed off one.
Yeah, the emo Sherlock Holmes, and you could do that, and so that's pretty. I think you could use Winnie the Pooh, stuff
Mm-hmm.
like that. So like, eventually things do need. Eventually, you should be able to make. If I want 10 years down the line, if I want to make my own Halo game, maybe I should be allowed to do it. I'm not going to do it, but you should be allowed to do it, right?
Yeah.
I think.
And I think the challenge again is that I will throw money that if we get a point where we're talking about laws, Nintendo will fight this tooth and nail.
No, number one. Yeah, I think they're going to be like the Metallica of the music industry, like of
Mm-hmm.
the video game industry. They're really going to fight it tooth and nail. I mean, I didn't get to fully read that article about how they prosecuted someone for the ROM hacks.
Mm-hmm.
Did you read that one? It was like
N-
14 million, 13 million.
no, but I've heard so many stories.
Yeah, it was just like 2 days ago, and it's just some kid, and he like Nintendo sued him 14 million, for ROMs, and it's like I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know what to think about that.
yeah,
I do, but
yeah. And again, like this again gets back at kind of the original point about that middle ground between the consumer and the developer side. That developers deserve to get paid. They don't deserve for their IPs to get stolen and ripped and things like that. But there's a huge difference between, somebody making a cute little Mario appreciation game or wanting to have access to games from 20 to 30 years ago, and somebody, ripping the files off of their Switch cartridges and putting them all up on, pirating sites for $0.
exactly. Um, use the
Yeah.
ROMs, emulation games and didn't preserve. Yeah. No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
And there has to be, again, like a more or a clearer definition as to what we accept as preservation and what we accept as piracy. Because for right now, ROMs are considered piracy. I don't agree with that. I'm sure a lot of people here don't agree with that. But if I want to try and play a game from 20, 30, or even, we're going to be even getting 40 years soon, that is considered, against the law.
Yeah. Nintendo should have paid the hackers who preserved the ROM. Yeah, I mean, like Nintendo should be like they should be rewarding the people who are preserving their history,
Mm-hmm.
right? They're not Nintendo's not losing money by people having the like by distributing the ROMs.
Mm-hmm.
If anything, again, like we discussed with piracy, people are going to buy the game if they're going to buy the game. People are going to buy the game if they're not going to. You know what I mean? Like it's the piracy is not going to stop them from buying the game. They're not going to play it and say, "Okay, I'm done."
Mm-hmm.
They're going to buy it if they want the game,
Yeah.
right? And so Nintendo should definitely take a more positive approach to that. And again, the definitions is the most important, and I think it's going to need to be it has to be in the laws, right?
Yeah.
We have to change our laws, because otherwise, like, this medium is just if we don't have any way to control what's happening, we're just going to lose so much of our history of the game development. And so we do need to have some laws to protect, just like we have laws to protect forests and laws to protect. We need laws to protect video games, because it's a massive art form, and also like the amount of revenue that it generates. And if you want to consider all those things, it's not something to just scoff about and ignore, that we need to preserve it.
Yeah, and that also means putting money and time into the actual emulation or the actual software and maybe even the hardware side as well. That maybe one alternative could be, oh yeah, this was something that I remember I heard about this last year. I don't know how true or if it's still going on, but somebody was working on like the grandmaster, the granddaddy of all hardware emulation. It was like a machine
I
that you
saw that.
could, yeah, you could put like your old Super Nintendo cartridges, your PlayStations, whatever, and it stores it on the system. And then this system or this little box is now your Super Nintendo, PlayStation, N64, whatever.
Right. I'm trying to remember the name of it, and it used a really cool, some really cool technology about switching like its gates, like the actual hardware it had an ability to organically switch things inside of it. It was really neat design. I didn't fully read it, and I'm probably doing it injustice, but yeah, I remember that was about 2 years ago.
Like year, 2 years, something
Yeah,
around that.
yeah,
And
that's right.
to Chris's comment, as a very interesting point, the Sega Genesis collection that is available on Steam, people have been setting up all the ROMs for Sega Genesis games on that thing because the emulation is technically free or it's actually available because it's built into that software. So the Steam Workshop has been a way I can play all my classic Sega Genesis games like through that one system. And
Oh, that's wild. That's pretty cool.
apparently Sega has not cracked down on it for
That's good.
I don't know whatever reason, but it certainly has helped in terms of getting those games. But
Yeah, there's no reason for them to do it.
yeah,
Like, are they going to like start? Are they going to keep selling the connection, like selling collections? Or there's no reason. The best reason would for them to be for everybody to play their games and to enjoy more Sega games. That's in their best interest.
yeah,
Yeah, both parties benefit from it, from
yeah.
allowing that.
I would like as a short term solution. I would like to see these companies maybe have, some places have like bounties. Like if you can crack a game or speedrun bounty. I'd like to see like a game preservation bounty that if you can preserve this game perfectly, the company can benefit from it. The team gets money from it, and just put it on sale for like a few dollars. Again, people like we're not talking about 50, 80, $200. I'm talking maybe like $2, $3, like kind of like the GOG route. That I'm sure a lot of
Yes,
people would
yes.
love. Like even again, like a horrible game like Jaws or any
For sure.
LGN game, they would still probably spend 99 cents or $1 or $2.
I would definitely buy Jaws again for like $2.99. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, for sure.
But again, the point is that, and this is something I always talk about, even when I, talk about my library presentation, that I want everyone to be happy at the end of the day. I want everyone to get the best deal. But as it stands right now, it's just not really working.
No, we're getting not a good deal at all. Like, not a good deal at all. We're losing so much of our history. If we want to try and view old games, it's very expensive and almost impossible. And yeah, so we're at the losing end of that right now. Definitely.
And I guess as kind of like my closing thoughts on this is that it's like kind of doom and gloom time. That there has to, without a proper solution, this is going to get worse. There's
Yes.
no doubt about it. And for anyone who's offended when I say that games like Halo, The Last of Us, Mario are garbage, well, that's how a lot of people treat video games. And if you really do support the artistic side of the game industry, then you should support game preservation as a legitimate answer and solution to this.
Exactly. So, emulation is like one of the most important things, right? So, I guess my final thought would be, for one, pro emulation. Piracy right now is needed because there's no other way, and it's one of the parts to keep things going. And again, we need to look into actually changing the law. So, hey, maybe if there's someone watching that's into legalese and might know something about that, how we can see about making some laws for our medium, so that way we can preserve it for our future generations and future developers and future gamers. And I think that's one of the best courses and that we can look at.
Yeah, but if there's any lawyers watching right now, please get in touch.
Please, definitely let us know.
And I guess as a bonus point, I was just thinking about it. And again, the solution to, like we said, it's unfortunately not going to, I think, come from the developers themselves or from the publishers. It's going to have to be a third party. It's going to have to be government and federally mandated.
Right, it's going to have to be government, grassroots. Developers sadly don't have the problem. I mean, we don't have the resources and the ability to do that. If we've worked on the game or developed it before, that's what we've done, and we've like already moved on to something else or are working on something else. So we don't have the ability to do that. So it's going to have to be from gamers for one. And I know gamers are super powerful and can do a lot of things. Right, I've seen some big changes that gamers have been able to do and rise up together. So government, grassroots, gamers all building together, and I think that we'd be able to find a solution. We have to. Yeah. We have to.
And it should not be difficult to play a game from 3 years ago, 5 years ago, let alone 20, 30 years ago. And if you do value the game industry, this should be something that you should be agreeing with. And it's going to take, I think, a lot of work. Not only, again, to create the laws or change them, but to convince the mainstream and the mass market about it.
Right. To consent, why is this even important? They're going to be like, why do you want to save these toys? It's going to be really hard to do that, definitely.
I'm just right now imagining in my head when I make the tweet when this episode goes up record about, do you care about trash games like The Last of Us, Halo, Mario? Then you should watch this video.
You should watch this one, definitely.
I'm sure I won't get in any trouble on Twitter on that.
I think that'll definitely help. Yeah, I like that one.
Yeah, exactly, Chris. We need the preservation console there.
That's right. We'll start one.
I guess here's a quick question for you, Josh. I'm just curious. What are your thoughts on GOG? Like, do you think that service has had a lot of impact on things?
I think so. I think I like GOG, and I think I don't think it's had a big enough impact as it should have.
Yeah.
Because it's been crushed by other. I feel like it's had certain ebbs and flows, but I definitely appreciate everything that GOG is doing, and I definitely think it's good for the industry in every way.
Yeah, me too. I wish it did do more, but again, I think people hoping that GOG would have been the Steam competitor, like, it just wasn't going to happen. Like, that's not what their market was supposed to be intended for.
I think that's probably what mine is I was hoping it would be a Steam competitor, but I guess that was just me hoping for more than was possible.
And to Gore's point about Night Dive, who's been doing some really great remasters with Shadow Man, Power Slave. I know they've been working on System Shock now for a few years.
Yes. I've been hyped for that one.
I think they're doing the remasters. I think some of the best ways. They're not remakes, but they're bringing them back. They're making them playable, and they're doing what they can to make them work for today. As in, they're not just leaving in annoying stuff or broken stuff because that's how it was. They're trying to make it something that's palatable to somebody today. And the fact that
quality of life changes, yes.
Yeah, I finished Shadow Man for the first time playing the remastered edition. I never managed to play that one or finish it back on the N64 era. So I can put that, in the complete column.
That's a rarity.
EGS, Epic Games, that's another topic we can certainly bounce off too. But
Epic Game Store.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, yeah, definitely another topic. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I mean, I could rattle off my GOG library. People want to hear all the games I have on it. I still have to play I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, too.
I have no mouse on my screen. Yes.
But I can certainly rant and rave about this for a few more hours. I guess any final points from you before we say goodnight?
Let's see here. All I can say is that anybody watching, everybody watching, this is all like our fight. Like
Mm-hmm.
if you are a gamer, everybody should be involved and should care about game preservation in every way. So look for ways that we can be activists. Look for things that we can do because it's super important to us, and we have to get it fixed. Like Josh was saying, we're pretty much almost at like Doom era
Mm-hmm.
time right now.
Yeah.
Like this is it. Things are gonna be gone forever, and we're not going to be able to get them back. Like it won't be
Mm-hmm.
possible. And
Yeah.
so yeah, we do need to be as proactive as we can. Be aware of it. Don't let it just slide away. And see if there's anything that you can do to help with game preservation. Be aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
And emulation and piracy is not bad.
Yeah. And as a message to future Josh, when I do upload this, I'm curious again to see how many comments when I post the Twitter comment about this are just going to be putting hate and vitriol in the comments about this.
I'm looking forward to it.
But that is going to do it for this week's Key to Games podcast. It was great hanging out with you, Josh. I think it's been a little bit more stable. So I know we had some hiccups, but I think last week was far worse, at least.
Yeah, I think this one seemed really good. I think maybe I saw one or two, but otherwise really good. It's real smooth. Definitely.
So I'd like to thank everybody watching this, either live or recorded. Do all the liking and subscribe. People now tell you to do commenting as well, so I got to throw that into my speech. If you want to catch these shows live, we're doing them Saturday, starting around like 4:30 ET. And for you, Josh, if people want to follow you and your work, what are the best places?
Always follow me on my Twitter. That's the best place. Josh will have a link down below, but it's Twitter at casual_scrub, and you can follow me there. I'm working on Samurai Pig. Be sure to check that out. And that's about it. And thank you for joining us.
Yeah, and thank you for those last hashtags, El Gordo, to really have it like memorialized for people watching this in the future.
That's right. It'll be there at the end.
Yeah, and enjoy your soup as well, Chris.
Excellent soup.
All right, and if you want to join the Game Wisdom Discord, there are links to that down below, as well as you can follow me at all those lovely sites and stuff in the upper right-hand corner of the overlay. If you want to support the Patreon and all that, check me out. But again, have a great evening and come back for daily discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where some of the art and science of games. And until then, take care.
Sure.